Episode 103, Faith-Filled Questioning with Meagan Skidmore.
Welcome to Latter-day Life Coaches, the podcast where each episode is a conversation between me, Heather Rackham, and one of my amazing coach colleagues. Each coach here is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and certified through the Life Coach School. Together, we have one main goal, helping you live your best life no matter what. You ready for this conversation with the coach? Here we go.
In the spring of 1820, the question by a young boy about which church he should join opened the restoration of the gospel and allowed God to once again speak to men on earth. If Joseph Smith had never had that question, where would your life be today? Even though our religion was brought back to earth through a question, we as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints often have a lot of fear around asking questions. Many fear asking questions will draw them away from God instead of closer to Him. Coach Meagan Skidmore found herself several years ago in a position where her faith and her lived reality did not match up, and she had a lot of questions. This put Meagan on a very unknown path, and what she found is that as she turned to God with her questions, her faith deepened. She wants to share that same hope with others who have questions and show them how questions can be a great tool one uses to expand and grow their faith. This is a wonderful episode with so much great information. Your faith will be fortified as you listen.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast today. It's always a pleasure to be here and to get to have this conversation. I think I have the best job in the world because I get to have conversations that I love and find so meaningful in my life. And today I am joined by Coach Meagan Skidmore, and I cannot wait for people to hear from you today. Meagan, can you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us a little bit about you?
Sure, I would love to. Thanks for having me on, Heather. First of all, like you said, I'm Meagan, pronounced with a long E. I live in Dallas, Texas, and we have lived here since 2004, long time. Many moons ago, I actually got a graduate degree in school counseling psychology at BYU. And a few years back, I was introduced to the world of coaching through Jody Moore's Be Bold program. And not long after joining it, I saw the link to the Life Coach School on her website, and I was sold. I knew right away that is what I wanted to do because life coaching and counseling or therapy are so closely related. And I've loved it. I certified about a year and a half ago. I describe myself as an empath, a creative, a deep thinker, and a storyteller who has a story to share. I'm a woman, a spouse, sister, aunt, and an LGBTQ plus mama. I was born and raised LDS, and my faith journey pivoted, as I like to call it, about 3.5 years ago. And this was about the time we learned our youngest identified as LGBTQ plus. So that is essentially once I certified over time, I really leaned into my story, and it was very clear to me that this needed to be my niche. And so I work with parents of LGBTQ plus kiddos of a conservative faith background who feel like their world has just been turned upside down. This isn't a space that brings up questions and concerns and struggles and things of that nature for just those of our faith background. Mm-hmm. It's of actually many, Baptist, Catholic, Methodist, Seventh-day Adventist, and so on. So I feel very called to this space. It's a beautiful space.
Mm-hmm. I do think that is such a good point. I think that we oftentimes think that we are in the minority, that the struggle that we have when we try to start navigating those waters and questioning some of our religious beliefs, that's not unique to us, that there is so many people, differing religions, that have that same area to navigate.
Yeah, because I live in Texas, it's I'm friends with people of all different faiths, and I have learned that this journey that I am on, you know, others are as well, that they have questions, or maybe there are things that they don't understand or see just yet how to embrace their kiddo and their faith, that it doesn't have to be either or. Like I view this as a faith journey, like I mentioned, or even better, a faith expansion. The term faith crisis has never really resonated with me, because to me, crisis implies something has gone terribly wrong. And in my experience, actually, my hindsight, vision is always clear, but I can see how many things have actually gone very right. I didn't say easy, but right.
Yeah, we have to differentiate that sometimes, don't we? There is a big difference between right and easy. I think it's interesting that you brought up questions, because I think that is the foundation and the basis of when things are not going the way that we plan or go, according to the scripted dialogue for what our lives we think should look like. And I would be curious to know how you view asking questions and how asking questions has helped you and your faith.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think traditionally, questions and doubts have had a negative connotation attached to them. That's actually one of the reasons why I started my podcast in August. If this gives you a little insight, it took me a year to actually finally start this podcast. And I think in large part, it has to do with kind of the shame that is cast over having questions and having doubts. I had clear inspiration in, I think it was like early fall, late summer of 2021, the name of my podcast, Beyond the Shadow of Doubt. And that is what I'm trying to do, both in that podcast space and also in my spaces with clients, and even just in my real life space, with friends and family, is to contribute to create this space where it's safe to ask questions and to, shine this light on having questions and doubts that get rid of the shadow of shame that's there. I read an article by a Christian author named Barnabas Piper, and I loved what he said about having questions and doubts. He says, having doubts and questions is not the same as unbelief. I think we often view that the opposite of faith is doubt, but actually the opposite of faith is certainty, right? And so that means that faith and uncertainty go hand in hand. They're like two sides of the same coin. Faith and doubt can coexist without it being a problem. And going back to this author, Barnabas Piper, he talks about a framework of 4 ways to determine unbelieving doubt versus believing doubt. He calls unbelieving doubt like skepticism. It asks questions in order to challenge, versus believing doubt asks them in order to learn. He says, unbelieving doubt takes questions to anyone but Jesus. Believing doubt takes questions directly to Jesus or the divine. Unbelieving doubt questions God's character because he's beyond our understanding, whereas believing doubt trusts in God's character because he is beyond our understanding. And then the fourth one he points out is unbelieving doubt says, not your will, but mine. Believing doubt, on the other hand, says, not my will, but yours be done. I don't necessarily agree with everything in this article, and we can put the link in the show notes for others to reference if they'd like. But what I do like is that he's opening up this conversation about having doubts and questions, which in turn contributes to peeling away these layers of shame or the idea that it's wrong to have doubt that over time have built up. And so for me, allowing that and leaning into it has actually been very liberating.
I felt very, I don't know, those questions or the four comments,
The framework.
questions, the framework, that's it is. That those four statements were, they felt very opening to me. They felt very inspiring almost. And thank you for sharing those.
Yeah.
So good. In coaching, we talk about obtaining wisdom from within. And, I remember when I first started coaching, somebody said, so if I hire you, you're going to tell me what to do about this situation. And my response was very quickly, oh no, like you already know inside of you how to handle the situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I just get to help you discover that and find it and pull out all the wisdom that you already have within you. And
absolutely.
Anyway, it's so great, right? Don't we have the best jobs, but
yeah, that's the mark of a good coach.
Yeah. How do we do that and still listen to and follow God as well? And I guess in asking that question, I am almost going to answer it myself, but I think that some of us think that they're separate, right? Like not my will, but thine be done. And I think there's a very fine line. I think his will and our will in most instances is very much the same, because we have these wills and these desires for a reason. But I would love to hear what your thoughts are.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I don't see them as an either or thing. Mm-hmm. As spiritual children of our heavenly parents, we were all born with divinity within us. That's a given. We're all born worthy, children of heavenly parents. That means we all have that potential to seek that divinity within, to seek that divine wisdom. So in my experience, it's a practice of doing both or blending the two. And one way we can do that, in my experience, is tapping into, claiming, learning about our personal authority. And I define personal authority as part free will and part the light of Christ. We're all born with the light of Christ within us. But when you marry those two things and you can lean into personal authority, that is also how we then give ourselves permission to connect with our inner wisdom or our inner knowing. Our personal authority is what allows us to choose how we want to move forward and allow others their God-given right, capacity, gift, and ability to do the same. So you can do that by being the one to go first, stepping up, helping normalize doubts and questions, contribute to creating safe spaces by being vulnerable yourself and sharing your doubts and questions. But until you give yourself permission to have them, right? That peel the shame away, that it doesn't make you an unbeliever. Doubt is not unbelief. Then we're not going to look inward for whatever reason, fear of being wrong or fear of how we're perceived or worry that we can't trust ourselves. That's one of the beautiful things about allowing that permission is we're actually deepening that relationship with ourself as well as with the divine. Makes sense?
Which I think, it makes total sense. And I think also leads me into my next question. And some of those questions that we ask are harder and easier than others. And sometimes we have questions and we're fearful of asking those questions because what we are thinking that leads to those questions, I guess, kind of seems contradictory. Is that a word? Yeah. Contradictory?
Yes.
All of a sudden something I was like, that didn't sound right. It kind of feels like it contradicts a little bit with doctrine that we have been taught. And so that's where I think for a lot of people, it gets very scary. It feels like uncharted territory. I don't know. Tell me, what are your thoughts?
For sure. And I think that's why these concepts of personal authority, learning to connect with that divine within us, our inner wisdom, are so important. Tapping into that divine inner wisdom is really another way of saying personal revelation. So claiming that personal authority, not just ability, but it's a right that we have to connect with divine inspiration, to that divine wisdom. This allows us to safely examine our questions and our doubts, and even learn to ask better questions or quote the right questions. And I want to share an excerpt with you to illustrate this. It's taken from the book, The Crucible of Doubt by Terrell and Fiona Givens.
Mm-hmm.
It's an excellent book. But starting on page 9, I quote what they wrote. Daniel Dennett wrote, "Philosophy is what you have to do until you figure out what questions you should have been asking in the first place." Then they go on to explain, disciples too must persevere until we get the questions right. We are all prisoners of our preconceptions and faulty models. Those are frequently the problem in faith crisis, not the questions that arise from them. And they continue, after all, the restoration unfolded because a young man asked questions. The scriptures are replete with encouragement to question. Ask that you may know the mysteries of God is common injunction, as is oft quoted verse from James 1. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God that giveth to all liberally, and it shall be given. We also receive many assurances that questioning will bear fruit. Quote, surely you shall receive a knowledge of whatsoever things you shall ask in faith, end quote. And the Givens continue, the unexamined paradigms with which we begin can negatively affect a healthy propensity to question. They can point us in the wrong direction, misdirect our attention, or constrain the answer we are capable of hearing. In those circumstances, as Joseph Smith learned, some people will fly to pieces like glass as soon as anything comes that is contrary to their traditions. And I know that was a chunk. There's so much awesome wisdom in that excerpt. All of these things rely on the relationship that we have with ourselves and the relationship that we have with the divine. And so I suggest that it's our ability to claim that personal authority. Remember, I define personal authority as part free will, part the light of Christ, that allows us to connect to that inner divine wisdom, which can guide us in asking the right questions and own them. And we can do that through our willingness to be vulnerable and authentic, putting ourselves out there. And this is one of the reasons that I love my work with my clients. I love to hear and discuss their questions. Oftentimes, this is the first safe place where they're allowed a release, where they're allowed to just, okay, here's the deal. This doesn't sit well with me, or I'm really frustrated and the emotion comes out, right? Mm-hmm. My dream, my hope, my wish is one day, that just kind of becomes the norm in our spiritual, or I guess religion is the organized element of spirituality, that we can have more of those types of spaces when we're congregated or meeting or whatever, gathering.
So it's so scary for so many people to feel that they can ask those things. I mean, and like you said, for many people, sitting with a coach or a counselor, somebody that they view maybe being a little bit, I don't want to say disconnected, but not like different from a religious leader, I think sometimes, because it feels scary to ask those questions in those situations, right? Because we fear judgment, and which is on us, right? Like we don't.
Right. We know that as coaches.
Yeah.
And the most healthy thing we can do is lean into that fear, right? That's what we encourage our clients to do. Okay, so somebody judges us. That's our fear. Let's say that happens. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, as coaches, we know whatever is coming out of the mouth of somebody else says more about them than about us. We get to choose if we allow that to define us or not. Mm-hmm. One of the greatest lessons I've learned as a coach, and I'm sure you can relate, is it's okay for people to be wrong about me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we have to learn. And what I like to just in my own mind have to think, okay, if I want to be able to be vulnerable to ask questions in a situation, or to be able to share my opinion that I think sometimes might be contradictory with what other people in the room believe, I just know that I'm going to have to allow that feeling that I experience when I think other people are judging, which for me, I don't know how to describe the feeling, but I just know that I'm going to have to just allow that. So in order for me to show up how I want to show up, that's something I'm going to need to allow. And I can allow that, and I can be brave all at the same time. I can do both of those things.
And that's the beauty of being human, that complexity.
Yeah.
Right. That's what makes us the more evolved and higher species, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, we're the only species that can think about our thinking. So yes, that's, we need to use that since it's been given to us. So,
exactly.
So you work with parents of LGBTQ plus children, right? And this seems to be a space where there are a lot of questions on how their children's orientation fits into the gospel. And I am curious what questions you have found helpful to bridge the gap between your story and doctrines of the gospel and your lived reality, because it is questions that lead us to this place, but it's also questions that can help lead us out of this space, right? Like it's the questions that you and I ask clients that get their brains thinking in another way as well. So questions are important on both ends of the spectrum. But
yeah, to answer that, let me back up to a few years ago, again, when I was first starting out on this pivot in my faith journey, or expansion, as I like to refer to it. I remember being called very strongly. I felt this call to be an advocate. And I remember feeling this pull to use what I view as my privilege as a white, cisgender female to speak up, to be a voice for the marginalized. And I think in large part, it was precisely because I realized that the viewpoints that I had of LGBTQ plus individuals up to that point in my life were grossly incorrect. My lived reality was, in fact, very different than the one I'd been told was the case, or taught, or read about previously. So I want to share with you an excerpt from Faith is Not Blind by Bruce C. and Marie K. Hafen that explains this phenomenon really well. Okay. So starting on page 8 of their book, they say, our experience with real life often introduces a new dimension, a growing awareness of a gap between the real and the ideal, between what is and what ought to be. Let's call this distance between where we are and where we want to be, quote, the gap. So continuing on, they say, we first see the gap when we realize that some things about ourselves or about other people are not what we thought they were. For example, at a church university, that one might expect to be warm and homey, a brand new student can feel lost and intimidated. Or maybe they brush up against a faculty member, and I include or fellow students whose attitudes are different than expected. We may begin to see human limitations of those who have previously been our heroes, such as parents, church leaders, teachers, etc. Or perhaps a mission doesn't turn out quite as one had anticipated. Or maybe we suffer a surprise setback with health, or come across information that raises questions we don't know how to answer. They continue, such experiences can produce an unsettling sense of uncertainty. We may begin to ask questions that haven't occurred to us before. But as we grow and increase in our awareness, most do run into uncertainty and opposition. So for me personally, I have learned how leaning into uncertainty and the unknown can be and is actually a blessing. It's mentally healthy. By leaning into this uncertainty, in essence, I'm turning the things I don't know back over to the divine. It's truly the ultimate walk of faith. I'm also allowing that divine wisdom to speak to me. This requires a deeper level of trust, much more than I thought that I had to begin with. That is what this journey has really taught me, how much I really don't know, and that I can be okay with that reality. It can actually be very exciting to ponder on all of the possibilities. The use of the word "and" has become commonplace in my vocabulary. And is opening an invitation to further light and knowledge, or accessing that divine wisdom. I believe that this is what starts to fill in what may be missing in, quote, the gap, as what was mentioned earlier. There's a quote by Elder Luke Dorff. I'm going to be paraphrasing it. But how many times has the Holy Spirit tried to teach us something, but can't get past the massive iron gates of what we thought we already knew? I think that is another reason why allowing uncertainty is so good and so helpful. And for me, why it's been a blessing. You're not teachable if you cannot or do not allow that. Because remember, certainty is the opposite of faith, not uncertainty. God is the only person, the only people, our heavenly parents, and I suppose the Savior, that truly know God is omniscient. That's what we're taught. That's what we understand. That's what we believe.
I can't remember who I heard this. I was listening to a coach speak at an event one time, and the comment that she made has always stuck with me. And I, like I said, I can't remember who it was, but she said that certainty, or thinking that we should be able to be certain about something, is a very entitled place to live. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was such an interesting comment that I have pondered a lot on. Mm-hmm. And we feel like we are entitled to being certain about something, when in reality, that's not life. And I think like being certain about something, that's almost like takes away the veil, that line between us and the pre-existence or the afterlife or anything. Like it would take away.
Right. And as coaches, we know that's our human nature. We're seeking that certainty because it feels safer, right? It's our primitive brain looking for the known, because we've told ourselves that's safe.
Yeah.
We have a harder time leaning into the unknown, but we can hold both, one in each hand.
Mm-hmm. And I've said this before on the podcast, but I used to think of myself very much as just a person who was gifted with the ability to believe, gifted with faith. And over the past 5 years, I have seen that belief kind of go away. Like no longer do I feel like it's just easy for me just to have faith and to believe. I feel like it's something that I really make the conscious decision to seek and strive for. And at this point in my life, where I used to think I had so much faith, I now don't necessarily see that as, it was a component of faith, but I think at this point in my life, I am practicing faith in a more expansive way than I ever have before. And I think blessed almost to be in this place. I feel like my relationship is different.
Absolutely. And I think that's why I like to refer to it as a faith expansion for me, because it's not that I have to stop believing, right?
Right.
Kind of like what the Givens were teaching us in the excerpt I read earlier. It's learning to ask. It's learning to be aware of our surroundings, the cultural paradigms, however they termed it, we're prisoners to those. But unless we can lean into all of the harder emotions, worry, fear, uncertainty, am I going to be judged? Am I going to be seen as an outsider, not belonging, right? Unless we're willing to lean into all of that, we're not going to be able to see the and and experience the and realize, oh, it's this and it's this.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy enough to think that is a conscious choice, like you said, that
Yeah.
we have the opportunity to make. Oh, I'm going to step back. Maybe I don't know everything. I'm going to be open-minded.
Much to my opinion, right? Like much to my dismay. I like to think that I know everything.
Right.
But the older I've gotten, the more I realize that actually it's really a gift not to know everything.
It is. Actually, that's the mentally healthy part that I mentioned earlier. It is a gift to like, you know what? I don't know. And I can hold the I don't know here and I can do this.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's always easy and that it always comes easily, but it is a healthier way, in my experience, to move forward.
Well, it does certainly leave you open to more divine understanding and the ability to see and listen and hear with open eyes and heart, because you don't feel like you said, it's not like I already know this. Recognizing that I may not know any of this.
Yes.
What I think I believe may be different in so many aspects, leaves us open to being teachable.
And if you're able to say, what don't I know about this? Great. And if you're not, then the question we often ask our clients is, what are you making that mean about you? If there's not that, you're not allowing yourself that wiggle room.
Yeah. It's good to ponder upon that too, because that's oftentimes where the judgment comes up. If I don't know this, or if I have a question about this, what am I making that mean about me? And oftentimes we're making it mean, I must not believe. I'm a doubter. I don't have faith. I don't have a testimony. We make it mean all those things that then kind of spiral us in directions that we don't really need to go.
Right.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it boils down to this. It's this human need. We're beings of connection, right? We all want to belong.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fear of not belonging is real. My trust in the divine has increased tenfold as part of this journey. And it's interesting how loosening my grip on the things I thought I knew has actually opened me up to deeper connection, understanding, and vision. And I want to share an excerpt with you from a CES broadcast in Oakland, California, given by Elder Oaks. It has the potential to empower us to allow that personal authority. He says at one point, if you are troubled about something we have just said, please listen very carefully to what I will say now. If you feel you are a special case, so that the strong counsel I have given doesn't apply to you, please don't write me a letter. Why would I make this request? I have learned that the kind of direct counsel I have given results in a large number of letters from members who feel they are an exception, and they want me to confirm that the things I have said just don't apply to them in their special circumstance. I will tell you why I can't offer much comfort in response to that kind of letter by telling you an experience I had with another person who was troubled by a general rule. I gave a talk in which I mentioned the commandment, thou shalt not kill. Afterwards, a man came up to me in tears saying that what I had said showed there was no hope for him. Well, what do you mean? I asked. He explained that he had been a machine gunner during the Korean War. During a frontal assault, his machine gun mowed down scores of enemy infantry. Their bodies were piled so high in front of his gun that he and his men had to push them away in order to maintain their field of fire. He had killed 100, he said, and now he must be going to hell because I had spoken of the Lord's commandment, thou shalt not to kill. The explanation I gave that man is the same explanation I give to you if you feel you're an exception to what I have said. As a general authority, it is my responsibility to teach general principles. When I do, I don't try to define all the exceptions. There are exceptions to some rules. For example, we believe the commandment is not violated by killing pursuant to a lawful order in an armed conflict. But don't ask me to give an opinion on your exception. I only teach the general rules. Whether an exception applies to you is your responsibility. You must work that out individually between you and the Lord. The prophet Joseph Smith taught this same thing in another way. When he was asked how he governed such a diverse group of saints, he said, I teach them correct principles and they govern themselves. In what I have just said, I am simply teaching correct principles and inviting each one of you to act upon these principles by governing yourself. So for me, the practical application I want to share with you is, for me, one of the greatest gifts of this journey. All of it has been a gift, but one of the greatest is, like I mentioned, my understanding, connection, and vision has deepened. I like to call it that my eternal eyes can see further into the soul of my fellow humans and deeper into who God is. It's hard to explain, but it's like I've better learned to how to view others as God does. I see those here on this mortal sojourn more as who they are, my fellow siblings with the same heavenly parents. I work harder at not othering folks and putting people into boxes, categories, and groups. Those are all man-made. It has helped me to own my journey and have confidence in it and compassion for myself and others when I've realized error in my ways, while simultaneously allowing others, meaning not judging, their God-given right to do the same. This, to me, is where the beauty comes in. There's beauty in complexity. There's beauty in simplicity as well. And
we need it all.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We need it all. And it starts with being able to be confident in who we are and in knowing that who we are is who we're supposed to be. And then offering that same grace and that same belief to other people.
Yes. And it all comes back to that relationship, that trust with ourselves and with the divine. It's so beautiful.
So yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Meagan, thank you so much for being with me here today. This has been a really thought-provoking conversation and one that I really appreciate. I would love if you could share with people where they can find more of you.
Yeah, my website is probably the best place to start. I have all of my social links there. My freebies are there. I have a 20-plus page interactive resource guide for LGBTQ plus families, and I try to include resources for not just our faith, but conservative faiths. And I'm working on, I have some for the US and Canada on there. My website is https://meaganskidmorecoaching.com. Just make sure to spell Meagan, MEAGAN. It's all one word. That's where you can link to my podcast, as well as my Facebook and Instagram and other links there.
Awesome. And we will link to all of that in the show notes. So we'll make it really easy for you to find. Yeah. But I appreciate this so much. And I appreciate all of our listeners today for being here and know that though we've been talking about this through the framework of an LGBTQ plus audience or
family,
a niche family, the things that we've talked about here today apply to obviously any area or anything where we are butting up against some of the things that we have thought that we have known about our belief system, our religion, our doctrines. And these are important questions. These are important things for us to learn about and teach our children about and just to embrace in our lives. So thank you for being here. Thank you for those that are listening.
My pleasure.
Hey, we just wanted to thank you for spending part of your day here with us at Latter-day Life Coaches and being part of this conversation. Share this with your friends so that you can have a conversation with them on this topic as well. And as always, subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Have a good one, my friends.